Enthusiasm notwithstanding the occasional mistake. Sir, I support this bill and commend it to the House.
Good one. I call Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to make a further contribution on this very important piece of legislation, the Police and Constable Oaths Validation Amendment Bill. And listen, I noticed my parliamentary colleague, Mr. McKelvey, in his contribution talked about the police numbers and the police record, but of course this is not about that. This is about serving police officers who have been let down by their hierarchy, which includes, in this case, the Minister. I note that, and I think that what underscores all of this is that the fault lies primarily in the political arena. The Minister at the time, the present Minister's predecessor, had known there had been a previous issue with the swearing of new police officers, because in spite of the changed legislation, the practices of the police hadn't changed. The Police Commissioner was required to have delegated the authority to take the oaths, and that had not happened. The then Minister, Judith Collins, knew that, and validating legislation had to be passed. It beggars belief, if indeed it is true, but it would beggar belief if that Minister, having been through that experience, taken the time of this House to validate a whole heap of incorrectly sworn oaths then, did not require the Commissioner on her regular meetings with the Commissioner, because she meets with the Commissioner, to require the Commissioner to assure her that the issue of his delegations had been sorted out and that the oaths that were being taken correctly and lawfully. That ought to have happened in the regular meetings between the Minister and the Commissioner, and it is quite apparent that it hasn't happened. That's what beggars belief. That's why responsibility for this failure sits firmly at the ministerial level, and I venture to say, as I said in the my second reading contribution, at the feet of the Minister at the time that these go back to, Judith Collins. It was her job to ensure that the oaths were being taken correctly, given the mistakes that had happened previously, and she was meeting with the Commissioner. This is not an operational matter, Mr. Speaker. This is a constitutional one. And on the cusp of Labour weekend, I want to draw this comparison. 100 years ago, the streets of Wellington were caught up and fraught with one of the most tense, difficult industrial disputes of our history. In fact, they described at the time that Wellington was on the verge of civil war. That was the waterfront dispute of 1913. What lay at the heart of that dispute? A whole bunch of special constables who had been sworn in and were allowed to ride mounted horses, carry batons and exercise charges on protesting and striking workers, which is what they did. Now, if they can get it right 100 years ago in one of the more disgraceful displays of coercive state power, it just beggars belief that in this day and age this executive, this government cannot get it right. So here is the warning. For the second time this Parliament has been taken up to make sure that police oaths are done correctly. Let the word go out and say to this Minister, it must not happen again. And this Minister must make sure that the present Commissioner and his replacement, when he is on board, must guarantee that the oaths are taken properly and lawfully and in accordance with the present police statute, because it would be wrong for the time of this Parliament to be taken up a third time to correct an avoidable mistake. So, Mr. Speaker, as my colleagues have said, of course we will support this, because the consequences of not supporting it and the constitutional consequences are too grave to contemplate. But we do so with a heavy heart, and we do so not because we are critical of the police. It is not their fault, apart perhaps from the Police Commissioner, but we do so because the executive has let them down, has let public servants in the form of the police down, and that is not good, and we should not allow that. So, Mr. Speaker, we will support it, but let's not do it again, and let's remember that particularly when it comes to the police, that very special force who exercise a very important place in our Constitution, is that we demand, and the public demands, they get the exercise of their powers right. That is why when there is a question about the exercise of their powers, it generates so much attention and so much press. Well, because we set a very high standard for our police. They are entitled to look to their political masters and demand the same high standard, and they've been let down. Let's pass this bill, let them get on with their job.
I call Louise Upston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.